The twin girls, their pink sweaters stained, their feet bare in the snow, their breath turning to mist as they stumbled along the icy sidewalk. The man who found them was not a policeman. He was a soldier who had seen war, the kind that leaves invisible scars. Beside him, a black and brown German shepherd, ears cocked forward, muscles taut. And then, through the chattering of teeth, one of the girls whispered words that tore through the icy silence. "He'll hurt Mom." Snow fell in lazy spirals, painting the streets of Anchorage in silver white. Ethan Cole, 38, a man with a soldier's bearing and eyes shadowed by memories, walked steadily through the cold. His black and brown German shepherd, Shadow, padded beside him, the leash loose in Ethan's gloved hand. They moved like they had for years, two survivors bound by unspoken trust. The sidewalks were nearly empty, only the crunch of boots and the faint hum of traffic far away. Ethan had chosen the long route home, letting the winter air clear the static in his head. Shadow's breath steamed in the frigid air, ears pricked as if listening for things Ethan couldn't hear. The street lamps flickered in the dim afternoon, their glow pooling on icy patches. That's when Ethan noticed movement ahead, two small figures stumbling barefoot along the snow-crusted sidewalk. The sight stopped him cold. Twin girls, maybe 6, both in pink sweaters smeared with dirt, bare feet red and raw against the snow. Their hair was matted, their breathing uneven. One clutched the other's hand, as if afraid letting go would make them vanish. Ethan's soldier instinct surged. He glanced at Shadow, whose muscles had gone tense, tail still, eyes locked on the children. They approached cautiously, not to spook them. "Hey," Ethan called softly, his voice carrying calm. "Are you hurt?" The girls froze. The taller one pulled her sister half behind her, as if guarding her. Their breaths came in white puffs. Ethan stopped a few feet away, crouched to their level. Shadow stayed by his side, steady and unmoving. "My name's Ethan," he said. "This is Shadow. We won't hurt you." The smaller girl's teeth chattered as she whispered, "He'll hurt Mom." The words sliced through the winter quiet. Ethan's jaw tightened. He kept his voice steady. "Who will?" She glanced toward the end of the block but said nothing. Ethan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his knit cap and offered it to the taller girl. "Here, it's warm." After a hesitation, she took it, pulling it over her sister's head first. Small hands trembled. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Sophie," the taller girl said. "She's Sadie." Ethan nodded slowly. "All right, Sophie. Sadie, you're safe with me. We're going somewhere warm." They didn't resist when he scooped one into each arm, their tiny bodies cold against him. Shadow stayed close, pacing with deliberate steps as Ethan moved quickly toward his truck, parked a block away. Snow squeaked underfoot. The girls' heads rested against his shoulders, exhaustion overtaking fear. Inside the truck, Ethan wrapped them in a spare blanket from the back seat. "Seat belts," he murmured, fastening them gently. Shadow jumped into the back, head resting between the seats, eyes flicking between the girls and the road. Ethan drove toward the small cabin he called home. "Can you tell me where you live?" he asked. Sophie shook her head. "Not going back." Sadie's small voice added, "He locks doors." Ethan didn't press, sensing the raw edges of fear. The heater hummed, filling the cab with warmth. By the time they reached the cabin, both girls were dozing, the kind of sleep that comes when survival urgency fades. Ethan carried them inside, setting them on the worn couch near the fire. Shadow curled nearby, his body heat radiating comfort. In the kitchen, Ethan filled 2 mugs with warm milk. When he returned, Sophie was awake, watching Shadow. "He's big," she murmured. Ethan smiled faintly. "And gentle. He used to be a military dog. Saved my life once." Sophie reached out, hesitant, then touched Shadow's fur. The dog leaned into it, sealing the trust. They drank in small sips. Ethan pulled an old quilt over them. "We'll figure this out in the morning," he said. But Sophie shook her head. "He'll come for us." Ethan met her gaze, seeing more than a child's fear. This was knowledge, experience she should never have had. He knew that look. He'd seen it in refugee camps and war zones. Shadow shifted, ears twitching toward the window, as if confirming the girl's warning. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, a fragile warmth settled in. Ethan didn't yet know what kind of storm was coming, but he knew one thing. He wasn't letting anyone hurt them again. Shadow lay like a sentinel, eyes half-lidded but alert, the firelight glinting off his coat. Inside the cabin, the air carried a deep, resinous scent of cedar logs stacked against the far wall. Heat bled from the cast-iron wood stove in soft waves, chasing away the sting of the road's wind. Ethan moved with quiet efficiency, setting 2 enamel mugs on the small pine table and filling them with fresh hot chocolate from a pot that had been simmering since morning. Sophie and Sadie sat huddled together on the old leather couch, both wrapped in Ethan's thick wool blanket, their legs pulled up and toes buried in borrowed socks several sizes too big. Their pink sweaters had thawed enough for the fabric to sag with dampness, and the frost had melted from their hair, revealing the faint tangles that spoke of days without a brush. Shadow settled at their feet, body curved protectively along the couch's base. His eyes shifted between each girl, then to Ethan, as if keeping count of the breaths they took. Every time one of the twins stirred, his ears flicked forward in quiet vigilance. Ethan crouched by the stove, added another log, and kept his voice low. "You're safe here. No one's coming through that door unless I let them." Sadie peeked out from the blanket's fold. "Mom said to run when Roy got mad. She said it like it was the last time she'd tell us anything." Sophie picked at the edge of the blanket. "He locked her in the room by the lake, the one with the broken window and the mattress on the floor." Ethan stayed still for a moment, letting the details land where they needed to in his mind. "How far is that from where you live?" "You have to go through the trees," Sadie said. "Past the frozen dock. Mom says the dock's been there since before we were born." Ethan's eyes caught Shadow's. The dog's tail gave a slow sweep as if confirming he'd filed that scent trail away already. While the twins sipped, Ethan busied himself at the counter, not for the sake of tidiness, but because movement sometimes made children talk more easily. He chopped carrots and potatoes into a small pot, letting the sound of the knife on wood serve as a gentle metronome. The soup's slow bubble filled the quiet. After a while, Ethan rose, placed 2 bowls in front of them, and returned to his chair. "What else can you tell me about Roy?" Sophie's nose wrinkled. "He smells like beer and smoke. He keeps a gun under his bed." Sadie nodded, then added, "Sometimes he talks to people on the phone late at night. They talk about deliveries in the river. Mom tells us to pretend to be asleep when that happens." Ethan didn't push for more. Trauma unwound at its own pace. He shifted the conversation. "Do you know where your mom kept her phone? Did Roy take it?" Sophie shook her head. "She dropped it once and it cracked. After that, it stayed in her pocket." The cabin's old wall clock ticked toward the top of the hour. Ethan stood, draped another blanket over the twins, and stepped onto the porch. The night had deepened into a blue so dense it pressed close. Somewhere in the woods, a snow-laden branch gave way with a muffled crack. He scanned the tree line, not for movement, but for what didn't move. Those absences often spoke louder. The crunch of boots in snow behind him made him glance over his shoulder. Caleb Turner, his neighbor from down the ridge, approached with his usual slow gait. Caleb was in his 70s, a man carved out of the Alaskan winter itself, with a weathered face under a wool cap pulled low, white stubble like frost on his jaw. His parka looked older than most of the town's buildings, patched at the elbows, the zipper missing its pull tab. "Heard you were out on the road earlier," Caleb said, his voice gravelly from decades of wood smoke and strong coffee. "Saw the tracks coming back here. You've got company?" "2 girl," Ethan said. "Sisters. Their mom's in trouble." Caleb's brows drew together, shadowing his eyes. "That wouldn't be Lena Rivers' girls, would it?" "The twins." Ethan nodded once. Caleb blew out a breath. "Then you've got Roy Mercer tangled in this, and that's a snarl you don't want to pull without gloves." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "He's been running with the Fairbanks crew the last few years. Meth, stolen parts, whatever makes him quick money. Last time I saw him in town, he had a Ruger tucked in his waistband like he wanted someone to notice." Ethan folded his arms, leaning against the porch rail. "Anything else I should know?" Caleb's gaze shifted toward the dark stretch of woods to the north. He's meaner when he's broke, and I've heard he's short on cash since a run went bad before Christmas. Word is, he owes someone up in the flats. That's when men get desperate. The older man's eyes softened, but his tone stayed blunt. Be careful, Cole. This isn't a guy who fights fair, and if he thinks those girls can be used to keep their mother in line, he'll come looking. Ethan nodded, filing away each detail. I'll take care of it. Caleb tipped his cap. I'll be here if you need an extra set of eyes. When Ethan stepped back inside, Sophie and Sadie had shifted closer to Shadow, their knees touching his warm flank. They looked up, the unspoken question in their faces. I'm going to find your mom, Ethan said, but for tonight, you're staying here. You'll bring her back? Sophie's voice was steady, but her grip on the blanket tightened. That's the plan, Ethan replied. Shadow rose from the floor, shook once, and padded over to the door. His nails clicked softly on the wood, ready to work. Ethan reached for his pack again, adjusting the gear inside. First thing in the morning, he said, we start with the trail by the lake. Shadow's ears tipped forward at the word lake, like a soldier hearing the call to move out. Ethan let his hand rest on the dog's head for a brief moment. Then he looked back at the twins. Get some rest. Shadow will stay with you until I'm back. The next morning broke in shades of silver and ash, the pale sun straining through a sky that looked like it had been brushed with frost. Ethan dressed with the economy of someone who had done it in worse conditions. Thermal base layers, a heavy parka, boots with fresh studs. Sophie's pink sweater lay folded on the arm of the couch where she had left it the night before. He picked it up, feeling the residual warmth from when she had worn it. The knit carried the faintest scent of smoke and something sweeter, strawberry shampoo maybe. It was enough for Shadow. The shepherd rose from where he had been resting, shook out his coat, and stood at attention without a word. Ethan crouched to hold the sweater low. Find her, he said simply. Shadow lowered his head, inhaling in long, deliberate pulls, letting the scent sink into memory. His tail straightened, his ears tilted forward, and without hesitation he padded toward the door. Ethan clipped on Shadow's tracking harness and stepped outside. The snow was fresh enough to reveal details, yet firm enough to hold shape ideal for following prints. Sophie's scent trail had faded in the direction they'd come from, but the one Ethan wanted led deeper into the trees, toward the unseen stretch of frozen water. The air was sharp, each breath clean but edged with cold that could cut a man careless enough to linger. Half a mile in, the pines began to thin, replaced by low birches whose bare branches etched black lines against the sky. The ground told its story in layers. Smaller footprints, probably the twins, mixed with larger, deeper impressions. A third pattern, wider and with heavier heel drag, suggested someone carrying weight or moving under strain. Ethan read the snow like a ledger. Years of reconnaissance in foreign deserts had taught him to see the world as a series of tracks, whether in sand or ice. Shadow's nose was low, his paws lifting and setting with surgical precision. Every few steps he paused to test the wind, checking for fresher traces. They were crossing a narrow gully when Ethan heard the hum of an approaching engine. He stepped to the side of the trail, motioning Shadow to heel. A dark green Ford Bronco rolled into view, chains clinking faintly against its tires. Behind the wheel was Deputy Nora Whitman, the county's youngest deputy, but one with a reputation for being methodical. She was 32, with a lean, athletic frame, honed from years of hiking the backcountry in all seasons. Her hair, a deep auburn, was pulled into a functional braid that hung over one shoulder. Freckles dusted her nose, and her eyes clear hazel had the alertness of someone who kept mental checklists for every situation. She slowed to a stop, rolled down the window and leaned an elbow on the frame. Caleb called me last night, she said without preamble. Said you've got Lena Rivers girls at your place. Ethan nodded. Safe and warm, but Lena's still out here somewhere, and I think Roy has her. Nora's mouth tightened at the mention of Roy. You know he's got a history. Used to run with a crew in Oregon. Got picked up on assault and trafficking charges 2 years ago. The case fell apart when the main witness vanished. Records show the charges were dropped, but it doesn't take a genius to guess why. She glanced toward Shadow, who stood patient but focused, his gaze still fixed down the trail. I can back you up, Nora said. But with this ice, my Bronco's not getting far past the ridgeline. You'll have to go on foot from here. Ethan gave a quick nod. You get there when you can. I'm not waiting. Nora smirked slightly, a recognition of shared stubbornness. I figured. Just don't make me write your name in a report for the wrong reasons. As the Bronco rolled away, Ethan and Shadow pressed on. The birches gave way to open ground, and through the trees he could see the dull gleam of the frozen lake. Its surface was a flat expanse, pale and unbroken except for a darkened oval near the center, where the ice had been disturbed and refrozen. On the far shore, tucked into the tree line, stood a weathered cabin. The roof sagged in the middle, a quilt of warped shingles and patches of tar paper. One corner of the porch leaned at an angle, its support beam split. From the rusted chimney, a wisp of smoke curled faintly fresh enough to be visible, faint enough to say whoever lit it had put it out not long ago. Shadow's ears pricked at the scent of something near. Ethan crouched to examine the ground beside the porch. Tire tracks, deep, wide, with a tread pattern he recognized from certain SUV models. The edges were sharp, the snow still clinging in compressed ridges. Less than an hour old, he murmured. He traced the arc of the tracks as they backed out toward a narrow access road that would eventually meet the county highway. He didn't go to the door yet. Years of experience told him the difference between finding a location and making an approach. Instead, he circled the cabin's perimeter, scanning for other signs. A pair of boot prints leading from the porch to the tree line, a scrap of flannel snagged on a nail, and a dented coffee thermos half buried in the snow near the rear. Shadow sniffed at the thermos, then gave a low, woof-not alarm, but acknowledgement. Ethan knelt beside him, resting a hand on the dog's shoulder. She's close, isn't she? Shadow's gaze didn't waver from the tree line beyond the cabin, his body a taut line of readiness. The decision settled in Ethan's mind like a stone finding the bottom of a stream. The cabin was a waypoint, not the final hold. Whoever had been here, likely Roy, had moved on recently and the tire tracks would be their next lead. But before leaving, Ethan made a mental note of every structural detail, every sightline, every possible exit. He didn't know yet if they'd return here, but instinct told him this place was part of the chain. As he rose, the wind shifted, bringing with it the faintest echo, a sound not quite mechanical, not quite natural. Shadow's head turned sharply toward the northeast, where the access road disappeared into a corridor of spruce. Ethan's jaw tightened. If Roy had a vehicle and Lena with him, they'd be pushing deeper into terrain where help would be slower to come. He took one last look at the cabin, then tapped Shadow's flank. We've got our trail. The shepherd surged forward, nose low, paws sure over the uneven crust. Ethan followed, the tire tracks now his roadmap into whatever waited beyond the tree line. The SUV tracks curved off the narrow access road into a stand of spruce where the trees grew so close together, the snow beneath them was thin and gray. Ethan slowed his pace, reading the subtle compressions in the earth where the tires had flattened old pine needles. Shadow ranged ahead, his nose sweeping in arcs just above the crusted snow, tail rigid, head turning fractionally every time the wind shifted. Ethan knew that stance. It was the posture of a dog who had locked onto the scent of both prey and danger. As they crested a small rise, the trees broke into a clearing on the edge of the lake's north shore. The lake itself lay silent under its thick coat of ice, but tucked into the shadow of the pines at its rim was a makeshift structure. It wasn't a permanent cabin, but a frame of scavenged poles covered with sheets of green military tarp, snow piled along its base to act as insulation and camouflage. From a distance, it could have passed for a forgotten hunting blind, but the faint wisp of breath in the air told Ethan there were living bodies inside. He lowered into a crouch, signaling Shadow with a hand flick. The shepherd melted into the snow's color palette, his body a blend of tan and dark where light hit his fur in patches. Ethan listened. At first, there was only the creak of the tarps shifting in the wind. Then voices, one sharp and ragged, the other low and trembling. The sharper voice was male, filled with an ugly rhythm Ethan recognized from men who needed to dominate a space to feel alive. The lower voice was female, cracked and pleading, Even without the words, he could picture the scene inside. His fingers tightened on the grip of the compact pistol holstered under his jacket. The male voice, Roy Mercer, spiked into clarity as a gust pressed the tarp inward. "You think you can run? You think anyone's coming out here for you?" Then came a scuffle, a muffled cry, and the sound of something metal scraping wood. Ethan's breath slowed to the pace he used in combat zones. He took one step forward, boots sinking an inch into the snow. The flap of tarp at the front rustled, and suddenly Roy emerged, his fist locked around Lena Rivers' upper arm. She stumbled forward, wrists bound in front of her with a length of nylon cord, her face blotched from cold and crying. Strands of brown hair clung to her damp cheeks, and a thin cut along her hairline had frozen over in a crust of red. Roy was in his mid-30s, solidly built with a wide chest that strained the seams of his camo jacket. His jaw was covered in a week-old beard that couldn't hide the jagged scar running from his left temple to his cheekbone, a scar that twisted his mouth into a permanent sneer. His eyes were pale and restless, darting from side to side like he was already looking for an escape route. In his right hand, pressed hard against Lena's neck, was a hunting knife, its blade reflecting the dull white of the snow. Ethan straightened, stepping into the open. "Let her go, Roy." His voice carried no tremor, no hint of plea, only the authority of someone who had said this before in far worse places. Roy's grip tightened, and Lena flinched. "Stay back, Cole. I know who you are. Soldier Boy thinks he's still playing hero. You take one step closer and I open her throat." Shadow moved, then not lunging, not yet, but adjusting his position in the snow. Weight forward, ears locked on the target. Ethan caught the slight rise of Lena's eyes toward the dog, and he gave the smallest nod, a silent signal that the shepherd would act. Roy's attention flicked toward Ethan for half a second too long. That was all Shadow needed. With a sudden surge, the German shepherd closed the distance in a blur, his muscles propelling him low and fast. His jaws clamped around Roy's wrist with the precision of a trap snapping shut. The knife clattered into the snow as Roy roared in pain, stumbling backward. Ethan was already moving. He closed the space, one hand yanking Lena safely behind him, while the other drove Roy down into the snow by the shoulder. Roy twisted, cursing, but Shadow stayed latched to the arm until Ethan barked the release command. The dog disengaged instantly, circling to keep himself between Roy and any potential weapon. Within seconds, Ethan had Roy face down, his knee pressed into the man's back. He pulled a length of paracord from his belt and bound Roy's wrists tight enough to cut off any thought of struggling. "You're done," Ethan said flatly. He reached for the radio on his shoulder. "Whitman, it's Cole. I have Mercer in custody. Lena Rivers secured. Coordinates coming now." Lena stood just beyond him, hands trembling even though the knife was gone. She was breathing hard, each exhale a puff in the cold air. "My girls, Sophie and Sadie, are they—" "They're safe," Ethan cut in gently, his tone softening for the first time. "They're at my cabin, warm and out of danger." Her shoulders sagged and a sob slipped past her lips. She covered her face with her bound hands, the nylon cord still tight around them. Ethan turned Roy over to sit him against a tree, checking the bindings once more. Roy's glare was pure venom, but he stayed silent, likely calculating his odds against both a trained soldier and a K-9 ready to launch again at a single word. As Ethan cut the cord from Lena's wrists, Shadow stayed in a position that gave him a clear line to Roy, while still close enough to touch Lena's leg with his nose. It was a subtle gesture, but Lena glanced down and managed a watery smile toward the dog. Then Shadow's head turned sharply toward the tree line behind the tarp shelter. His ears stood high, and a low growl built in his chest. Ethan froze for a fraction, reading his partner's body. This wasn't the relaxed watchfulness from before. This was alert to movement just out of sight. He slipped his pistol free, scanning the tree line. "We're not alone," he murmured. Lena's breath hitched, and even Roy shifted against the tree, a flicker of recognition in his eyes that told Ethan the man knew exactly who or what might be out there. But the sound faded into the wind, leaving only the hiss of snow skittering over ice. Ethan didn't relax, neither did Shadow. Whatever had been there was gone for now, but it had left its mark in the shepherd's stance, a reminder that the fight might not be finished. A week later, The hard edge of crisis had softened into a quieter rhythm, though the snow still ruled Anchorage's streets and rooftops. Aurora Safe Haven sat on a small rise at the edge of town, a two-story clapboard building painted in cheerful yellows and blues that somehow defied the gray sky above it. The place had once been a convent, but now its rooms were full of women and children reclaiming pieces of their lives, each story stitched with threads of survival. Lena Rivers stood on the front porch of the shelter, her brown hair clean and loosely braided, her cheeks touched with the pink of winter air. She wore a borrowed parka, a little too big, but zipped to her chin. Her eyes, though still ringed with the shadows of exhaustion, carried a different kind of weight now. Not just the memory of fear, but the tentative strength of someone beginning to believe in safe ground. Sophie and Sadie spilled out onto the porch ahead of her, identical in their pink knit hats and mismatched gloves. They had taken to the shelter's routines easily, but their real anchor came in the form of the black and tan German Shepherd, trotting toward them across the shoveled walk. Shadow's ears were up, his breath fogging in the cold, tail making an easy sweeping arc. Ethan walked a few paces behind the dog, his frame broad under a dark green field jacket, the brim of a wool watch cap shadowing his eyes. His beard was trimmed short now, flecked with silver, and though his stride was as measured as ever, there was less of the old isolation in the way he carried himself. The twins called out together, "Shadow!" in that unself-conscious pitch that always made Ethan feel something catch in his chest. The dog quickened his pace, slowing just enough not to bowl them over before they latched onto his neck in a tangle of small arms. He accepted it with the patient dignity of a veteran who had seen much and chosen gentleness anyway. Ethan reached the porch and exchanged a brief smile with Lena. "You're getting your exercise," he said, nodding toward the twins now leading Shadow toward the small snow-packed yard at the side of the building. "He's more popular than I am," Lena replied, her voice warmer than it had been a week ago. There was gratitude in it, unspoken but steady. The yard had become their meeting place in the afternoons. The shelter's staff kept it clear of deep snow, leaving a patch where kids could run. Sophie and Sadie invented elaborate games where Shadow was alternately a sled dog, a snow rescue hero, or a guardian of imaginary castles. He played his roles with uncanny timing, charging forward when they called for rescue, standing sentinel when they declared danger near, and occasionally collapsing into the snow with a long-suffering sigh that made both girls giggle until they toppled over. Ethan would lean against the low fence, watching the three of them, feeling something shift in him he hadn't been aware of missing. Years of soldiering had trained him to carry only what was necessary, to strip life down to the essentials. But standing there with the cold air in his lungs and the sound of their laughter in his ears, he wondered if maybe this was necessary too. Inside the shelter, the common room was warm with the smell of coffee and bread. A tall woman with close-cropped gray hair and a turquoise scarf, Marion Holt, the shelter's director, greeted Ethan when he came in to warm up. Marion was in her early 60s, with the calm authority of someone who had steered many storms. She'd once been a school counselor before turning her life to running Aurora Safe Haven. "They're doing better," she told Ethan in a low voice, nodding toward where Lena was helping in the kitchen. "Still jumpy at sudden noises, but that's normal. The twins sleep through most nights now." She glanced at him over the rim of her glasses. "And you?" Ethan gave a small shrug. "I check in." Marion's smile was knowing. "More than you used to." That afternoon, the weak sun spilled across the yard in a pale gold, turning the snow to glitter. Sophie and Sadie sat cross-legged on a plaid blanket spread over the hard-packed ground, a set of colored pencils and paper in front of them. Shadow lay nearby, his tail flicking lazily, one ear cocked toward their conversation. Ethan joined them, crouching to see what they were working on. Sophie held up a drawing. 4 figures, 2 taller and 2 shorter, all holding hands. One of the tall figures had a square jaw and brown hair under a cap. The other had long brown hair tied back. Behind them, a big-eared, long-tailed dog stood with his tongue lolling out. Beneath it, in careful block letters, Sadie had written, "Our safe family." Ethan felt something tighten in his throat. "That's all of us?" he asked. Sophie nodded, smiling. "You, Mommy, me, and Sadie, and Shadow." He's always behind us, Sadie added, because he watches. Ethan looked at the dog who, as if on cue, opened one eye and thumped his tail once before returning to his semi-doze. Lena stepped out from the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She took in the scene, the blanket, the drawing, Ethan kneeling beside the girls, and her expression softened into something almost shy. Ethan stood as she approached, handing her the picture. "They've been busy," he said. She studied it for a long moment before tucking it gently into her coat pocket. "I think I'll keep this where I can see it." As the sun slipped lower, Ethan walked with Lena along the fence, while the twins played one last game of snow rescue with Shadow. She told him about the support group sessions she'd begun attending, about a woman named Claire in the group who had been through something eerily similar and had become an anchor in her first week. "It's hard," Lena admitted, "but it's not the same kind of hard. It's moving forward, not just surviving." Ethan listened, offering the quiet nods of someone who knew when words would add and when they would only dilute. By the time they returned to the porch, the cold had deepened. The twins bundled themselves into Lena's sides, and Shadow pressed close to them all, as if making a circle with his body. Ethan looked at the three of them, and for the first time in years, he felt less like an outsider to his own life. In the corner of the yard, the setting sun cast a warm line across the snow, and Shadow shifted so that it touched his fur. His eyes half closed, the picture of a soldier at rest. Sometimes the most powerful rescue is not the moment we pull someone from danger, but the days and weeks after, when we choose to stay, to show up, to keep holding that line of safety until they can stand on their own. For Ethan, for Lena, for Sophie and Sadie, and for Shadow, it was never just about surviving that winter. It was about finding the courage to believe in family again, even if that family didn't begin in the way they expected. If you believe every child deserves a place where they feel safe, and that loyalty and kindness can change the course of a life, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might be the encouragement someone needs today. And if this story touched you, please like this video and follow our channel for more true stories of hope and healing.